Hi everyone, how are we doing? So, the next part of our lecture is looking at the 1973 to 75 recession. But before we do that, we have to go back to the early 1960s to lay out how the U.S. government interacted with the oil market around the world. So, it is the case that up till 1972, the U.S. played a significant role in determining oil production in the Middle East. We sent a lot of oil companies over there in the 50s to set up the infrastructure to mine for oil, and in the 1950s things were working all right to a degree, but eventually that caused major social unrest in the Middle East, which is beyond the scope of this class, but ultimately in the long run did not work out well. But for our purposes, from 1960 to 72, the U.S. helped determine the level of oil production in the Middle East and also in the U.S. So we can have the oil market, and let's let S prime be oil production in the U.S. So upward sloping supply curve, business as usual. And then also we have S double prime ME for Middle East. And it's the case that the U.S. helped determine the level of production in the Middle East, determine total oil production in the U.S. So the U.S. was in a unique position that they were one of the most developed countries in the world at that time, but they also had a significant amount of oil production within the United States borders. So, if you look at this graph, this is now drawing a supply curve S, and S equals S prime plus S double prime. So I'm kind of adding these two supply curves together, and it'll be represented by this upward sloping supply curve S. And then what I have is, this is, again, oil production on the horizontal axis and the price of oil on the vertical axis. And then we'll have a demand curve. This is demand curve for the U.S. So what we have is, we have a price of oil in the U.S. which is called PUS. Okay? And that's the quantity of oil consumed in the U.S. 0Q0. So let's put a 0 right there. So, what was unique back then was the U.S. government wanted oil prices to be relatively low in the U.S. economy. And their logic was that oil was an incredibly important input in terms of factors of production. Oil was used to heat homes. Oil was used to convert to gasoline so we could drive our cars around the country to and from work, to and from buying goods and services, going to grocery stores and such. So the U.S. determined production in the Middle East and the U.S. production to keep the price of U.S. to be less than the price in the rest of the world. So in the 60s, we were creating the production of oil to keep oil prices relatively low in the U.S. and much lower than the rest of the world. And that will cause problems in the U.S. economy, as we will go through in the next video. So again, just to summarize, we have the supply of oil coming from two different places, the U.S. and also the Middle East. And again, the U.S. played a significant role in determining the position of this supply curve. So then we have our supply of total oil for the U.S., which is again S prime plus S double prime. And then we have an equilibrium value of equilibrium price of PUS. And again, what we're going to argue in the next lecture is this low price relative to the rest of the world actually was a setup conditions for the oil price shocks in the 73 to 75 period, which actually caused a significant recession in the U.S. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.